A single wrong turn during the busiest shift of her life leads Zara Williams into a VIP lounge she was never meant to see, where a dangerous Korean syndicate leader recognizes something rare in her exhausted determination and refuses to let her disappear back into the shadows. At 24, Zara balanced cocktail trays with the precision of someone who understood that dropped glasses meant deducted wages she could not afford. The Grand Meridian Hotel demanded perfection from its staff, and she delivered it night after night, her natural hair pulled into an elegant protective style that somehow managed to look professional even after 12-hour shifts. She moved through the lobby bar with fluid grace, her deep brown eyes scanning tables for empty glasses and impatient gestures, every movement calculated to maximize tips while minimizing effort. The paralegal certification program acceptance letter sat folded in her employee locker, a reminder of dreams deferred by financial reality. She needed $8,000 for the program, had $4,200 in debt instead, and worked double 6 days a week trying to bridge an impossible gap. The elevator bank during Friday evening rush was chaos incarnate, service staff mixing with guests, everyone rushing somewhere urgent. Zara stepped into what she thought was the service elevator, exhaustion making her movements automatic, muscle memory guiding her toward the 19th floor where the executive banquet was supposed to be. The doors opened onto opulent silence instead of kitchen chaos. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, leather seating arranged in intimate conversation clusters, crystal decanters catching light from custom fixtures. This was not the service corridor she needed. This was the Meridian Club, the hotel's most exclusive private lounge, accessible only to members whose wealth measured in generations rather than paychecks. She turned toward the elevator, but the doors had closed, the floor indicator showing a service hold. Panic fluttered in her chest. Being found in the wrong place could cost her job, and losing this position meant losing everything she had built toward her future. The lounge appeared empty, shadows and expensive silence, until movement near the far windows caught her attention. He stood with his back to her, a figure of controlled intensity silhouetted against the city lights. Even from across the room, his presence filled the space like a physical weight. When he turned, she found herself looking at sharp, almost sculptured features, dark hair swept back with geometric precision, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her intrusion. His suit was charcoal black, perfectly tailored, the kind of garment that cost more than her monthly rent. Everything about him radiated wealth and authority, from the way he held his shoulders to the unconscious command in his posture. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I took the wrong elevator. I will leave immediately." He studied her with those calculating dark eyes, taking in her hotel uniform, the professional composure she maintained despite obvious exhaustion, the way she held herself with dignity even caught in an embarrassing mistake. "Wait," he said, his English perfect with just a trace of accent that suggested Korea. His voice was low, melodic, with an undertone of absolute authority. "You work here?" "Yes, sir, bartender," she replied, maintaining professional courtesy while mentally calculating how quickly she could reach the elevator. "I was trying to get to the executive level for an event." Instead of dismissing her, he gestured toward the private bar that dominated one wall of the lounge. The setup was magnificent, premium bottles arranged like artwork, equipment that represented the pinnacle of mixology craft. "Make me something," he said. It was not quite a request, not quite a command, but something between that carried expectation of compliance. Zara hesitated, knowing she had no authority to serve in this space, but recognizing something in his tone that suggested refusal might be more problematic than compliance. She moved behind the bar with the same fluid efficiency she brought to her regular station, scanning the available ingredients with professional assessment. The selection was extraordinary, spirits she had only read about in certification manuals, tools she had dreamed of using. "What would you prefer?" she asked, hands already reaching for bottles with practiced certainty. "Surprise me," he replied, settling into a chair that provided clear view of her work. She built something complex, layering flavors with the precision of someone who understood that cocktails were architecture made liquid. Whiskey formed the foundation, Japanese if she read the label correctly, something that probably cost more per ounce than she made per hour. Bitters and liqueur created complexity. Simple syrup balanced the bite. Expressed lemon oils crowned the creation. Every movement was economical, professional, the result of countless hours perfecting craft that remained largely invisible to most customers. He accepted the glass, studied the presentation, inhaled the aromatics with the attention of someone who understood quality. The first sip brought something that might have been surprise to his controlled features, followed by what could have been approval. "Excellent," he said simply. "Thank you, sir," she replied, already moving to clean her workspace with the same methodical precision she brought to every task. "What is your name?" he asked, still holding the cocktail with something approaching reverence. "Zara Williams," she replied, wondering why this felt more like an interview than a chance encounter. "Kong Jiziak," he said, offering his name like a gift. "How long have you been bartending?" 3 years, she said, polishing glasses that were already spotless. "I am working toward my paralegal certification." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of ambition that might have been respect. He reached into his jacket, withdrew a wallet of rich cordovan leather, the kind of accessory that suggested generational wealth. From it, he extracted $500 bills, placing them on the bar with deliberate precision. "For the drink," he said simply. Zara stared at the money, more than she made in an entire week, more than her last 3 shifts combined. Her fingers trembled slightly as she processed what was happening. "I cannot accept this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Hotel policy prohibits accepting excessive gratuities. And honestly, no drink is worth $500. He studied her with renewed interest, dark eyes reflecting something that might have been surprise. "Keep the money," he said, but she was already shaking her head. "I appreciate the gesture," she said, pushing the bills back toward him with steady hands despite the internal war raging between need and principle. "But I cannot take payment I have not earned." Jiziak picked up the money slowly, his movements deliberate, but instead of returning it to his wallet, he set 1 bill aside and returned the rest. "For the drink," he said, indicating the single hundred. "The rest was a test." "A test?" she repeated, not quite a question. "To see if you were like everyone else," he replied, finishing his cocktail with obvious appreciation. "You are not." From the same expensive wallet, he withdrew a business card, heavy stock with minimal design, just a name and phone number in elegant script. "When you are ready for something better than double shifts and deferred dreams, call me," he said, placing the card beside the $100 bill. The elevator chimed, service hold releasing, doors opening to reveal the familiar chaos of staff rushing between floors. Zara looked from the card to his composed face, seeing something in his expression that suggested this moment carried more weight than a chance encounter between customer and server. "Why would you help someone you do not know?" she asked, genuine curiosity overriding professional caution. "Because I recognize quality when I see it," he replied, standing with fluid grace that spoke of physical confidence and unconscious authority. "And because people with integrity are rare enough to be valuable." She slipped the card into her pocket, left the 100 on the bar, and stepped toward the elevator with her professional composure intact despite the strange electricity of the encounter. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of Kong Jiziak standing beside the windows, city lights painting shadows across his sharp features, watching her departure with the focused attention of someone who had found something unexpectedly interesting. The executive banquet required 3 hours of flawless service, but throughout the evening, Zara found herself reaching into her pocket to touch the business card, wondering what kind of man carried that much cash casually and what sort of better life he might have in mind. She worked her shift with the same professional excellence she always delivered, but beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted, a recognition that the carefully controlled world she had built might be about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. 3 weeks after the encounter in the VIP lounge, Zara Williams discovered that some debts could not be outrun and some dangers required protection she could never provide for herself. The Grand Meridian had cut her shifts from 6 days to 4, management citing seasonal downturn and staff reduction. Her already impossible financial situation became catastrophic overnight. The paralegal program acceptance letter now felt like mockery. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million, and the eviction notice taped to her studio apartment door confirmed what she had been trying not to calculate. She had exactly 11 days to produce rent money she did not possess, for an apartment she could barely afford when working full-time. Kong Jiziek's business card had lived in her wallet for 3 weeks, moved from pocket to pocket, a constant reminder of possibilities she could not quite bring herself to explore. Something better than double shifts and deferred dreams, he had said, but better could mean anything, and men with that kind of wealth rarely offered help without expecting something substantial in return. She was walking home from her shortened evening shift, exhaustion making her movements automatic, when the first sign of real trouble appeared. A black sedan with tinted windows had been parked across from the hotel when she left, still there when she turned the corner 6 blocks later, now following at a careful distance that suggested professional surveillance rather than coincidence. Her heart began hammering against her ribs, but she forced herself to maintain normal pace, normal breathing, normal appearance of someone heading home after work. The street was empty, late enough that foot traffic had dwindled to nothing, early enough that the bars had not yet released their patrons into the night. She turned down the side street leading to her building, hoping the car would continue straight, but headlights swept around the corner behind her. The sedan accelerated, pulling alongside the curb just ahead of her position, doors opening before the vehicle had completely stopped. 5 men emerged with the coordinated precision of people accustomed to working together, spreading into formation that blocked both forward progress and retreat. They were large, well-dressed, carrying themselves with the casual confidence of individuals who understood violence as a business tool. Zara Williams, the center man, called, his voice carrying just enough accent to suggest origins outside the country. "We need to talk." "I think you have the wrong person," she replied, her voice steady despite the terror climbing her throat like ice water. "No mistake," he said, producing a manila folder thick with paperwork. "Your boyfriend Rico Martinez has been very busy with your social security number, very creative with your credit history, very expensive with our money." "Rico," she breathed, the name hitting her like a physical blow. Her ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago, the charming liar who had disappeared from her life as suddenly as he had entered it, leaving behind only a drawer full of unpaid bills and a lesson about trusting too easily. $15,000, the man continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing weather rather than sums that could destroy her life. "Plus interest, plus fees for our time and trouble. Your name, your credit, your responsibility." "I did not sign anything," she said, backing toward the building entrance, but another man had positioned himself there, cutting off her escape route. "Identity theft is a civil matter between you and Rico," the spokesman replied. "Debt collection is a business matter between you and us." Much simpler. Zara's blood turned to ice as the implications crystallized. These were loan sharks, professionals who understood that legal distinctions meant nothing when collection was the priority. Rico had destroyed her credit and placed her in debt to people who solved problems through violence, and her protestations of innocence would only delay the inevitable. "I do not have $15,000, she said, the words barely above a whisper. "We know," he said, his smile holding no warmth whatsoever. "That is why we have arranged alternative payment methods. You are young, attractive, intelligent. There are markets for such qualities." The meaning behind his words hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. They were not here for money. They were here for her, to sell her into whatever hell served their business interests. Her legs nearly buckled as the full scope of her situation became clear. She was about to disappear from her life, from her dreams, from everything she had worked to build, because a man she had trusted 2 years ago had chosen to destroy her. "I need time," she managed, stalling because running seemed impossible and screaming seemed pointless and fighting would only make things worse. "Time is expensive," the man replied, checking his watch with deliberate theatricality. "We have a schedule to maintain." The sound of an approaching engine cut through the night air, like salvation taking mechanical form. A black SUV with tinted windows materialized at the end of the street, moving with purposeful speed that suggested the driver had specific destination and limited patience for obstacles. The loan sharks noticed it immediately, their casual confidence shifting to alert caution as the vehicle pulled to a stop directly behind their sedan. The driver's door opened, and Kong Jiziak stepped out with fluid grace that somehow managed to convey both wealth and danger in a single movement. He was dressed in another impeccable suit, charcoal gray this time, his sharp features composed in an expression of controlled displeasure that made the temperature seem to drop 10 degrees. His dark eyes swept the scene with calculating assessment, taking in the formation of men, Zara's obvious terror, and the manila folders still clutched in the spokesman's hand. "Gentlemen," Jiziak said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "You appear to be conducting business in my territory without proper authorization." "Your territory," the spokesman replied, but his earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the wariness of someone recognizing unexpected complications. "Kong Jiziak," Jiziak said, offering his name like a declaration of ownership. "And you are operating debt collection on property under my protection." He withdrew a phone from his jacket, speed-dialed the number, spoke briefly in what sounded like Korean. The conversation was quiet, businesslike, lasting perhaps 30 seconds. When he ended the call, he returned the phone to his pocket and looked directly at the loan shark spokesman. "Rico Martinez's debts have been transferred to my organization, effective immediately," Jiziak said with finality that brooked no argument. "Miss Williams is no longer your concern." The spokesman's face had gone pale during the brief phone conversation, recognition dawning that he was dealing with someone whose authority superseded his own. "We were not informed of any transfer," he said weakly. "You are being informed now," Jiziak replied. "I suggest you verify with your supervisors before proceeding further." One of the other loan sharks was already on his phone, speaking in urgent whispers. The conversation was brief, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable as he listened to whatever instructions he was receiving. When he ended the call, he nodded to the spokesman with obvious reluctance. "Confirmed," he said simply. "Excellent," Jiziak said, his tone suggesting the outcome had never been in doubt. "I trust this concludes your business here." The 5 men retreated to their sedan with the haste of people who understood they had narrowly avoided serious consequences. The engine started immediately, the vehicle disappearing down the street with speed that suggested desperate desire to be elsewhere. Zara stood frozen against the building wall, adrenaline and terror leaving her legs unsteady and her breathing shallow. The immediate danger had passed, but she found herself facing someone potentially more dangerous than the people he had just dismissed. Kong Jiziak approached her with measured steps, his expression shifting from cold authority to something resembling concern. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice gentler than she had heard before. "I do not think so," she managed, though her hands were trembling and her heart still hammered against her ribs. "You are in shock," he observed, studying her with professional assessment. "You need medical attention and somewhere safe to process what just happened." Without waiting for her response, he guided her toward his SUV, his touch firm but careful on her elbow. The interior was luxury incarnate, leather seats and climate control and technology that probably cost more than her annual income. He activated something on the dashboard that created privacy partition between front and rear sections. "Where are we going?" she asked as he pulled away from the curb. "Somewhere you can think clearly," he replied, navigating through late-night traffic with confidence born of familiarity with the city's rhythms. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a medical facility that appeared to operate 24 hours despite its exclusive appearance. The doctor who examined Zara was professional, thorough, and asked no questions about the circumstances that had brought her there in the middle of the night. She was given medication for anxiety, for fluids for dehydration brought on by stress, and time to let her breathing return to normal rhythm. Jiziak waited in the consultation room while she was treated, his presence somehow both comforting and intimidating. When the doctor finished his examination and declared her physically stable, Jiziak dismissed him with thanks and a payment that seemed to ensure discretion along with service. "Rico Martinez will not trouble you again," Jiziak said once they were alone. "His debts have been absorbed into my organization's portfolio, and his credit for borrowing has been permanently revoked." "Why?" she asked, the question that had been building since his unexpected appearance. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." "I know enough," he replied, settling into the chair across from her hospital bed. "I know you have integrity, competence, and strength. I know you are in a situation that requires resources you do not possess. And I know that talent should not be wasted on circumstances. She studied his sharp features, trying to read motivations behind his controlled expression. What do you want in return? She asked, because men like you do not perform rescue operations from altruism. Something that resembled a smile crossed his features, appreciation for her directness in the midst of trauma. Smart question, he said. I want to offer you a position that solves your financial problems permanently while utilizing your skills in ways that matter. What kind of position? She asked, though part of her already understood that whatever he was proposing would change everything about her carefully controlled life. The kind that requires trust, discretion, and loyalty, he replied. The kind that offers security, education, and a future worth having. The kind that recognizes your value and compensates accordingly. Zara looked at this man who had materialized to save her from a fate worse than death, who spoke of opportunities in the same controlled tone he had used to dismiss armed criminals, who offered salvation wrapped in terms she did not yet understand. The paralegal program acceptance letter was still in her wallet, but the life it represented might already be over, destroyed by Rico's betrayal and resurrected by Kong Jiziek's intervention. I will need details, she said carefully. Tomorrow, he promised. Tonight, you rest somewhere safe while your world stops spinning. Tomorrow, we discuss your future. The SUV carried them through empty streets toward whatever tomorrow would bring, and Zara Williams found herself wondering if salvation always came disguised as something that looked exactly like beautiful, dangerous temptation. The next morning arrived with the clarity that comes after surviving impossible circumstances, and Zara Williams found herself sitting across from Kong Jiziek in an office that redefined her understanding of what money could accomplish. His building occupied an entire city block, the kind of real estate that suggested generational wealth and institutional power. The private elevator required a key card and biometric scanner, rising 40 floors without stopping to a penthouse office that served as both workspace and fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the city below, natural light filtering through what appeared to be bulletproof glass to illuminate leather furniture and dark mahogany surfaces that had been crafted by masters of their trade. Jiziek sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier, its surface clear except for a single manila folder, 2 phones, and a fountain pen that probably cost more than her monthly salary. He was dressed in charcoal gray again, his sharp features composed in an expression of professional courtesy that somehow managed to convey both respect and absolute authority. The man who had saved her life 12 hours ago had transformed into someone conducting serious business, and she understood that whatever happened in this room would determine the trajectory of her entire future. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing toward a leather chair positioned directly across from his desk. I trust you slept adequately despite the circumstances. As well as could be expected, she replied, settling into furniture that probably cost more than her car. The guest suite in his building had been more luxurious than any hotel she had ever experienced, but sleep had been elusive, her mind cycling through everything that had changed in less than 24 hours. Good, he said, opening the manila folder with deliberate precision. Today we discuss your future, assuming you are interested in having one that extends beyond immediate survival. I am listening, she said, folding her hands in her lap to prevent them from betraying her nervousness. Jiziek withdrew several documents from the folder, arranging them on the desk's surface with the methodical care of someone accustomed to negotiations that carried significant consequences. The contract before you outlines a position with my organization, he began, his voice taking on the formal cadence of someone presenting business terms. Annual compensation of $120,000, paid monthly, with performance bonuses based on discretion and reliability. Zara blinked, processing numbers that represented more money than she had ever imagined earning in a single year. $120,000 would solve every financial problem she had ever faced, would pay for the paralegal program 10 times over, would provide security she had never dared to dream about. Your role would be personal bartender and hospitality coordinator for exclusive private events, he continued, seemingly unaware of her shock. These gatherings involve high-level business discussions that require absolute discretion and professional service. You would be responsible for beverage preparation, guest comfort, and maintaining an atmosphere conducive to sensitive negotiations. She found her voice despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "What kind of business discussions?" she asked, though part of her suspected she already knew. "The kind that prefer privacy and understand that certain conversations should not be documented or overheard," he replied with the diplomatic precision of someone who had refined this explanation through repetition. "Import and export coordination, territory management, dispute resolution, strategic planning." Territory management sounded remarkably like organized crime territory division, and dispute resolution suggested methods that rarely involved courtrooms or legal mediation. She was being offered a front-row seat to criminal enterprise operations, disguised as high-end hospitality work. "The compensation includes full tuition coverage for any educational program you choose to pursue," he said, adding another document to the arrangement. "Law school, business school, advanced certifications, whatever aligns with your career aspirations. Additionally, a luxury apartment will be provided for your family members who currently depend on your income." "Family members," she repeated, realizing he had researched her background with thoroughness that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. "Your grandmother who raised you," he said simply. "The woman whose medical expenses consume 30% of your current income. She would have access to premium healthcare and comfortable living arrangements that ensure her remaining years are marked by dignity rather than financial stress." Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes as she processed what he was offering. Her grandmother's medications alone cost more than most people spent on rent, and the assisted living facility she deserved was so far beyond Zara's financial reach that she had never allowed herself to consider it seriously. "In exchange," he continued, his tone remaining businesslike despite the emotional weight of his words, "you would live on my property, ensuring availability for events that may require short notice. You would report exclusively to me, maintaining absolute silence regarding anything you observe or overhear during the course of your employment. Loyalty and discretion are not merely preferred but essential." Zara studied his composed features, understanding that she was being recruited into something far more complex than bartending. Living on his property meant accepting his protection while surrendering her independence. Absolute silence meant becoming complicit in activities she could not legally discuss. Loyalty meant choosing him over law enforcement if circumstances ever required such a choice. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked, testing the boundaries of this negotiation. "You return to your previous life," he replied without hesitation. "Your debts to Rico's creditors remain transferred to my organization and will not trouble you further, but you receive no other assistance. You continue working at the hotel, struggling with expenses, watching your grandmother's health decline because you cannot afford proper care. And if I accept but later change my mind?" she asked, pushing further into territory that felt dangerous to explore. His expression grew colder, the professional courtesy replaced by something that reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. "Betrayal of trust results in immediate termination of all benefits," he said, his voice dropping several degrees. "Apartment lease revoked, medical coverage canceled, tuition payments stopped, protection withdrawn. You would return to precisely the situation you were in yesterday evening, with the added complication that certain people might view your departure as a security risk requiring management." The threat was politely stated but crystal clear. Once she entered his world, leaving would not be simple resignation, but potential danger to her own survival. She would become part of his organization, with all the benefits and risks that such membership entailed. Zara stared at the documents spread across his desk, her mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with mathematics and everything to do with survival and morality. $120,000 plus benefits represented security beyond her wildest dreams. Her grandmother could live with dignity. She could pursue education without drowning in debt. She could build a future instead of merely surviving each paycheck. But accepting meant entering a world where violence solved problems, where loyalty trumped legality, where silence protected criminal enterprise. She would be trading her independence for protection, her moral clarity for financial security, her simple life for something infinitely more complex and dangerous. On the other hand, refusing meant returning to impossible circumstances that had nearly gotten her killed 12 hours ago. The loan sharks might be gone, but other problems would emerge. Her grandmother's medications would continue consuming her income. The paralegal program would remain financially impossible. She would spend the rest of her life working multiple jobs to survive rather than building toward anything meaningful. She looked into Jiziek's dark eyes, seeing patience mixed with expectation, understanding that this moment would define everything that came after. He was not merely offering employment, but proposing a fundamental transformation of her existence, from struggling service worker to protected member of his organization. The choice was not really between right and wrong, she realized. The choice was between certain continued suffering and uncertain, but potentially better alternatives. Between integrity that kept her poor and compromise that offered prosperity. Between independence that had proven inadequate and dependence that promised security. Maybe morality was a luxury she could not afford, she thought, remembering her grandmother's tired face and her own exhaustion from years of working toward dreams that remained perpetually out of reach. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. Jiziek's expression shifted subtly, professional satisfaction replacing the watchful intensity he had maintained during her deliberation. "Excellent," he said, producing a sleek smartphone and an electronic key card from his desk drawer. "Your phone, with direct access to my personal line and all necessary contacts. Your key, providing access to the penthouse suite where you will reside." She accepted both items, feeling their weight as symbols of a life she was choosing to enter. The phone was Topophthalene technology. The key card bore her name in elegant script, both representing resources and responsibilities she was only beginning to understand. "Welcome to your new life, Zara Williams," he said, standing with fluid grace that spoke of controlled power. "I believe you will find it considerably more interesting than your previous circumstances." As she looked out through the bulletproof windows at the city spread below, Zara understood that she had just crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. She had chosen security over struggle, protection over independence, and whatever came next would be shaped by this moment when she decided that survival sometimes required embracing beautiful, dangerous salvation. 2 months after signing her name to a contract that redefined everything about her existence, Zara Williams discovered that luxury could become comfortable with surprising speed, but understanding the man who provided it remained infinitely more complex. The penthouse suite occupied the entire 42nd floor, an expanse of marble and glass that initially felt more like a museum than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic city views that changed with the light throughout the day, custom furniture arranged in conversation areas that suggested both comfort and formality. Her bedroom was larger than her entire previous apartment, the walk-in closet stocked with designer clothing in her exact measurements, the bathroom featuring amenities she had previously only seen in luxury hotels. But beyond the material transformation, she found herself settling into routines that felt surprisingly natural. Morning coffee prepared in a kitchen equipped with professional-grade everything. Afternoon study sessions at a desk positioned to catch optimal light. Evening meals shared with Jiziek when his schedule permitted such domestic normalcy. He was unexpectedly considerate, remembering her preferences for tea over wine, ensuring her study materials arrived before she knew she needed them, maintaining conversation that never felt forced despite their unusual circumstances. The exclusive events began 3 weeks into her employment, gatherings that revealed the scope and sophistication of Jiziek's organization. Men arrived in expensive cars with discreet security details, speaking in multiple languages about shipments and territories and negotiations that required delicate handling. Zara served drinks with professional precision, maintaining the invisible presence that allowed conversations to flow naturally while ensuring every guest felt properly attended. She witnessed Jiziek's authority during these meetings, the way other powerful men deferred to his judgment, sought his approval for major decisions, reported on operations that spanned multiple continents. His organization was vast, sophisticated, operating with business protocols that would not have been out of place in Fortune 500 boardrooms except for the underlying current of violence that seemed to inform every strategic decision. What surprised her was his consideration for her comfort during these events. He positioned her station to provide optimal working conditions while maintaining safe distance from sensitive discussions. He introduced her to guests as his personal hospitality coordinator, a title that conveyed both respect and clear boundaries. He never expected her to work beyond reasonable hours, never demanded she compromise her dignity for business purposes, never made her feel like decoration rather than professional staff. Between events, they developed something that approached friendship, sharing meals and conversations that ranged from current events to philosophical questions about ambition and loyalty. He was remarkably well-educated, possessing insights into art and literature that suggested genuine intellectual curiosity rather than cultural affectation. She found herself looking forward to their discussions, appreciating his perspective on subjects she was studying in her newly resumed paralegal program. Her transformation extended beyond material circumstances to fundamental confidence in her own capabilities. The constant stress of financial survival had been replaced by security that allowed her to focus on growth rather than mere persistence. Her grades were exceptional, her professors impressed with her analytical skills, her future suddenly bright with possibilities that had been unimaginable just months earlier. The woman who had once worked doubles to pay rent was becoming someone who could envision law school, career advancement, professional recognition. Her grandmother's situation had similarly improved dramatically. The assisted living facility was everything Zara had hoped for, providing medical care, social activities, and dignity that had been impossible when limited by Medicaid reimbursements. Weekly visits revealed a woman who was thriving rather than merely surviving, whose health had stabilized, and whose spirits had lifted now that financial stress no longer dominated every conversation. Yet despite growing comfort with her new circumstances, Zara remained aware that she was living in a carefully constructed bubble, protected from the harsher realities of Jiziek's world by his deliberate shielding of her from anything that might prove too disturbing for civilian sensibilities. That protection ended abruptly on a February evening when winter storm warnings had emptied the city streets of everyone except those with urgent business. Zara was reviewing contract law textbooks in the penthouse library when building security called Jiziek's direct line with a report that sent him moving toward the elevator with grim urgency. Someone left a package outside the main entrance, the head of security reported, his voice tense with concern that was immediately infectious. Not a bomb, sir. Worse. Jiziek descended 42 floors with Zara following despite his suggestion that she remain upstairs, driven by curiosity and growing certainty that whatever waited below would prove significant. The lobby was empty except for security personnel standing around something small and bundled near the revolving door entrance. The package was an infant, perhaps 6 months old, wrapped in a thin blanket that provided inadequate protection against sub-zero temperatures. The baby was unconscious, lips blue with hypothermia, breathing shallow and irregular in a way that suggested immediate medical intervention was required to prevent death. Call emergency services, Jiziek ordered. But even as security reached for phones, Zara was already moving toward the child with instincts she had not known she possessed. No time, she said, scooping the infant into her arms and assessing the situation with competence that surprised everyone, including herself. This baby needs warming and stimulation now, or emergency services will be arriving to treat a corpse. She moved toward the elevator with the child pressed against her chest, speaking in low, comforting tones while her hands worked to stimulate circulation and encourage breathing. The baby was frighteningly cold, unresponsive to touch or voice, but Zara's movements were confident and purposeful as she provided exactly the kind of immediate care that makes the difference between survival and tragedy. Jiziek followed her upstairs, watching with growing amazement as she transformed the penthouse guest bedroom into a makeshift nursery, adjusting temperature and humidity while maintaining constant physical contact with the infant. She seemed to understand intuitively what was needed, moving with efficiency born of knowledge she had never mentioned possessing. The baby's breathing began improving under her care, color returning slowly to features that had been alarmingly pale, tiny hands beginning to move with increasing strength. When the private physician arrived 20 minutes later, he found a child who was stabilizing rather than deteriorating, cared for by someone who clearly understood infant emergency protocols. "Where did you learn pediatric care?" the doctor asked Zara while completing his examination of the now responsive baby. I helped raise my cousin's children, she replied, accepting a bottle of formula from Jiziek's surprisingly well-equipped kitchen. Emergency childcare was often my responsibility when their parents were working multiple jobs. The physician declared the infant stable but requiring continued monitoring, recommending placement with social services pending investigation into the abandonment circumstances. But when he left an hour later, both Zara and Jiziek understood that the child would remain in the penthouse, at least temporarily, under care that had already proven more effective than any institutional alternative. As the evening progressed into night, Zara maintained constant vigilance over the sleeping infant, while Jiziek watched from the doorway with an expression of controlled emotion that she had never seen before. The powerful man who commanded international criminal operations seemed completely overwhelmed by the presence of a helpless child, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching fear. "You are remarkable with children," he said finally, settling into a chair position to observe both Zara and the baby. "Children are honest," she replied, adjusting the blanket with gentle precision. "They do not pretend to be something they are not. They simply exist and trust that someone will care for them." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of deeper meaning in her words. "I had a sister once," he said quietly, his voice carrying emotional weight she had never heard before. "Younger than me by 8 years. Sweet, innocent, everything good about family." Zara looked up from the baby, sensing that he was about to reveal something significant about the origins of his protective instincts. "Her name was Minji," he continued, withdrawing his phone and scrolling to a photograph that showed a beautiful young woman with delicate features and a radiant smile. She was studying music, planning to become a teacher, wanted nothing to do with family business. I was building the organization then, focused entirely on expansion and territory acquisition. The photograph showed Jiziek perhaps 10 years younger, standing with his arm around a girl who clearly adored her older brother, both of them laughing at something outside the camera frame. The image was heartbreaking in its normalcy, a glimpse of the family man he might have been under different circumstances. "She met someone," he said, his voice growing quieter as painful memories surfaced. "Seemed like a good man, respectful, ambitious, everything our parents would have approved of. I was too busy with business to pay proper attention to her relationship, too focused on power and money to notice she needed help." Zara remained silent, understanding that he was sharing trauma that explained everything about his current behavior, his protective instincts, his need to shield those who could not shield themselves. "By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late," he continued, tears threatening at the corners of his eyes for the first time since she had known him. "He was hurting her, controlling her, isolating her from family. When she finally tried to leave him, he killed her. Made it look like an accident, but I knew." The baby stirred in Zara's arms, making soft sounds that required her attention, but she maintained eye contact with Jiziek while providing comfort to the child. She could see the guilt and rage that had shaped his adult life, the recognition that his sister might still be alive if he had prioritized family over empire building. "I built all of this." He gestured toward the penthouse and the city beyond, but none of it brought her back. None of it changed the fact that I failed when she needed me most. Power without purpose is just sophisticated revenge. "You cannot save someone who is already gone," Zara said gently, rocking the baby with movements that seemed to calm both infant and man. "But you can ensure that other people do not suffer the same fate. That is why I cannot ignore women in danger," he said, his voice stronger now that the confession was complete. "That is why your situation mattered to me from the moment I saw those bruises. That is why this child will be safe here for as long as necessary." Zara looked from the peaceful baby to the man who had just revealed the emotional foundation beneath his controlled exterior. She understood now that his protection was not possession but penance, his generosity not manipulation but memorial to a sister he could not save. The dangerous criminal who had rescued her from loan sharks was also a grieving brother who had never forgiven himself for focusing on wrong priorities when family needed him most. The baby fell asleep against her chest, breathing steady and strong. Color returned to features that had been frighteningly pale just hours earlier. Jiziek watched with something approaching wonder as she provided exactly the kind of care that made the difference between survival and tragedy, seeing in her competence the second chance he had been unconsciously seeking. She makes you feel less alone, Zara observed, recognizing that the infant had become something more than rescue mission for both of them. She makes me feel less like a monster, he replied, his honesty raw and complete. And you make me remember that there is more to life than power and revenge. In that moment, surrounded by luxury that could not heal old wounds but sheltering a child who represented hope for new beginnings, Zara Williams understood that she had stopped being an employee and become something infinitely more complex and precious to the man who had saved her life by allowing her to help save his soul. 3 weeks after the abandoned baby had transformed their carefully structured arrangement into something resembling a family, Zara Williams learned that some threats could not be negotiated away and some protection required violence that left permanent marks on everyone involved. The infant they had named Hope was thriving under Zara's care, her pediatrician declaring her development exceptional despite the traumatic circumstances of her discovery. The penthouse had been subtly modified to accommodate a child, safety measures installed with the same thoroughness that characterized all of Jiziak's security arrangements. Hope had become the center of their domestic routine, her needs providing structure to days that had previously been defined by business meetings and criminal enterprise logistics. Jiziak proved surprisingly competent with infant care despite his initial overwhelmed reaction to her presence. He learned to prepare bottles with scientific precision, mastered the art of gentle burping, developed techniques for soothing midnight crying that worked when Zara's methods proved insufficient. Watching him hold the baby with careful reverence was like observing a master of violence discover tenderness he had forgotten he possessed. But their peaceful domestic illusion was shattered at 2:30 on a Thursday morning when building alarms screamed into life with urgent intensity that sent Jiziak reaching for the secured phone beside his bed before his eyes were fully open. Breach on 38. His head of security reported with clipped professionalism that barely contained panic. Multiple hostels and stairwell, heading up. They bypassed primary systems like they had blueprints. Jiziak was moving before the conversation ended, pulling on clothes with swift efficiency while issuing orders through his earpiece to security teams positioned throughout the building. Zara sat up in bed, immediately alert despite the early hour, understanding that real danger had penetrated their fortress. Get Hope and lock yourself in the safe room, Jiziak instructed, his voice carrying the cold authority that emerged during crisis situations. Do not open the door for anyone except me, regardless of what you hear. The safe room was reinforced against everything except direct military assault, stocked with supplies to sustain occupancy for several days if necessary. Zara gathered the sleeping baby with movements that were swift but gentle, her mind automatically calculating diaper supply and formula requirements while her heart hammered against her ribs with terror she was trying not to acknowledge. She was halfway to the safe room when the penthouse lights cut out, emergency power casting everything into dim red illumination that transformed familiar surroundings into something alien and threatening. Hope stirred in her arms but did not wake, trusting sleep that spoke of security Zara no longer felt justified in maintaining. The elevator chimed softly, doors opening to reveal 5 men dressed in tactical gear that suggested professional military training. They moved with coordinated precision through the penthouse, weapons raised, communication conducted through hand signals that indicated extensive preparation for this specific operation. Zara pressed herself against the wall outside the safe room. Hope clutched against her chest, understanding that reaching the reinforced door would require crossing open space that would expose them both to immediate capture. The men were searching systematically, checking every room with thoroughness that suggested they knew exactly what they were looking for. Find the woman and child. One of them spoke in accented English that sounded Korean but carried regional variations she could not identify. They are leverage. The Korean bastard values them more than his own life. She held her breath, trying to make herself invisible while Hope remained peacefully asleep against her chest, the baby's trust in her protection both heartbreaking and terrifying. These men had come specifically for them, understanding that Jiziak's emotional attachment made them valuable beyond any monetary consideration. The safe room door seemed impossibly distant, 10 feet that might as well have been 10 miles given the tactical positions of the intruders. Moving toward it would trigger immediate confrontation, but remaining hidden was temporary solution at best. They would find her eventually, and when they did, Hope would become a tool for controlling the man who had shown them both kindness and protection. Gunfire erupted from somewhere below them, automatic weapons creating percussion that vibrated through the building structure. Jiziek's security team had engaged the threat, but the sounds of battle were moving upward, suggesting the attackers had anticipated resistance and prepared accordingly. One of the men in the penthouse spoke into his radio with urgent intensity. "Primary team engaged," he reported. "Securing package now before situation deteriorates further." Hope chose that moment to wake up, making the soft crying sounds that meant she needed feeding or changing or simply wanted comfort. The sound carried clearly through the silent penthouse, immediately drawing attention from every intruder who understood that babies could not be silenced through intimidation. There, one of them pointed toward her position, and suddenly concealment was no longer possible. Zara ran toward the safe room, with Hope pressed tightly against her chest, her feet bare and silent on marble flooring that provided no traction for rapid movement. Behind her, tactical boots began pursuit with coordinated efficiency that suggested capture was inevitable rather than merely probable. She reached the safe room door as hands grabbed her shoulders, pulling her backward with professional restraint that avoided injuring the baby while ensuring she could not escape. Hope was crying now, frightened by sudden movement and raised voices, her distress adding emotional weight to circumstances that were already unbearable. "Do not hurt her," Zara said, shielding the baby with her body even as she was forced toward the elevator. "She is innocent. She has nothing to do with your business with Jiziek." "Innocent means valuable," the apparent leader replied, his tone suggesting he had conducted similar operations before. "Children make excellent motivation for cooperation." The elevator descended toward ground level while Hope's crying intensified, her distress feeding Zara's terror in ways that made rational thought nearly impossible. She found herself whispering comfort to the baby while calculating desperate escape scenarios that all seemed to end with violence that could harm the child she was trying to protect. But the elevator stopped at the 20th floor, doors opening to reveal Jiziek standing in the corridor with an expression of cold rage that made the temperature seem to drop 10 degrees. He was dressed in tactical gear similar to his attackers, but his presence carried authority that immediately shifted the dynamics of the confrontation. "Release them," he said, his voice carrying quiet menace that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. "We have terms to discuss," the leader replied, but his earlier confidence had evaporated upon seeing Jiziek's controlled fury. "No terms," Jiziek said simply. "Release them or discover what happens to people who threaten my family." The word family carried emotional weight that seemed to surprise everyone, including Zara, but the tactical situation remained unchanged. 5 armed men held hostages that one man valued beyond his own life, creating leverage that should have guaranteed successful negotiation. Instead, Jiziek moved with fluid violence that ended the standoff before it could develop into extended confrontation. His attack was precise, efficient, targeted to neutralize threats without endangering the baby who remained pressed against Zara's chest throughout the brief battle. Within 30 seconds, all 5 intruders were unconscious or incapacitated, their weapons secured, their threat eliminated. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the violence he had just unleashed. "We are fine," Zara replied, though her hands were shaking and Hope was still crying from the chaos she had witnessed. "Go to the safe room," he instructed, his tone returning to cold authority. "Lock the door. Do not open it until I return, regardless of how long that takes." "Where are you going?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "To ensure this never happens again," he replied, his expression promising consequences that would be permanent and comprehensive. Jiziek disappeared into the stairwell with movements that suggested he was transforming from protective guardian back into dangerous predator, and Zara understood that whatever happened over the next few hours would fundamentally change everything about their carefully constructed life. She spent 6 hours in the safe room with Hope, feeding and comforting the baby, while listening to sounds of activity throughout the building that suggested extensive operations were underway. Security teams moved through corridors, vehicles arrived and departed, Phone conversations conducted in multiple languages dealt with logistics she preferred not to understand. When Jiziak finally returned, dawn was filtering through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across furniture that had been displaced during the invasion. He appeared exhausted, his tactical gear replaced by casual clothing, but his eyes carried satisfaction mixed with something that might have been relief. "Is it over?" Zara asked, though his expression already provided the answer. "Completely," he replied, settling into a chair position to observe both her and the baby. "The organization responsible for tonight's events no longer exists. Their leadership has been eliminated, their operations dismantled, their territories redistributed. There will be no retaliation because there is no one left to retaliate." The implications of his words were clear. He had not merely responded to attack, but had eliminated an entire criminal faction overnight, using resources and violence that spoke of capabilities she was only beginning to understand. "You could have been killed," she said, recognizing that his protective response had placed him in danger that could have left both her and Hope without his protection. "The alternative was unacceptable," he replied, his voice carrying conviction that suggested the decision had never been in doubt. "You and Hope are not negotiable. You are not leverage to be used against me. You are family, and I protect what belongs to me." The possession in his words should have been frightening, but instead Zara found herself feeling secure in ways that transcended physical safety. He was claiming them both, acknowledging that their relationship had evolved beyond business arrangement into something that carried emotional weight he was willing to kill for. "You said family," she observed, understanding that the word represented commitment he had not previously expressed. "Because that is what you are," he replied, moving closer to where she sat holding Hope. "Both of you. The arrangement we started with was business. This is personal. This is permanent." Jiziak reached out to touch Hope's sleeping face with gentle reverence, his expression soft despite the violence he had recently unleashed. "When you care for her, you give me peace I never expected to find. When you trust me with your safety, you give me purpose beyond power and money. When you look at me like I am worth saving, you make me believe redemption is possible." Zara felt tears threatening as she processed the emotional transformation she was witnessing. The dangerous criminal who had rescued her from loan sharks had become a man willing to wage war to protect the family they had accidentally created together. "I love her," she said simply, acknowledging feelings that had developed without her conscious permission. "And I love you." Both truths feel equally impossible and equally necessary. "You are mine," he said, his voice carrying possession that was claim rather than threat. "Both of you. I will never let anyone threaten what we have built here." "We are yours," she agreed, understanding that she was accepting protection that came with absolute commitment. "And you are ours, broken pieces and all. Forever," he promised, pulling her closer while Hope slept peacefully between them. And Zara Williams understood that she had found something she had never known she was searching for, a family worth protecting with everything they possessed, including their lives. 6 months after a home invasion that had nearly destroyed everything they were building together, Zara Williams found herself once again sitting across from Kong Jiziak in the office where their arrangement had first been negotiated. But this time the conversation would be about forever rather than employment terms. The penthouse office looked exactly as it had during their initial meeting. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding city views, leather furniture and mahogany surfaces arranged with the same precision that characterized all of Jiziak's professional spaces. But the man behind the massive desk had changed fundamentally, his sharp features softer when he looked at her, his controlled intensity tempered by contentment that had not existed when their relationship was merely business. Hope was thriving at 8 months old, her development remarkable according to pediatricians who marveled at her progress under Zara's devoted care. The baby had become the center of their domestic routine, her schedule providing structure to days that balanced Jiziak's legitimate business operations with Zara's completed paralegal certification and plans for law school applications. The threat that had driven them into the safe room was permanently eliminated, but its aftermath had revealed how completely their lives had become intertwined. Jiziak's organization now included child-proofing protocols and security measures designed specifically to protect family members rather than just high-value assets. Zara had evolved from employee to partner, her legal expertise proving invaluable for operations that required navigation of complex regulatory environments. Today's meeting carried ceremonial weight that both of them understood. Jiziak had requested her presence in the office where their arrangement began, suggesting that whatever he wanted to discuss required the formality of his most professional space. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying the same courteous authority she remembered from their first negotiation, but warmth had replaced the careful calculation she had sensed then. "Of course," she replied, settling into the same leather chair she had occupied when accepting his original proposition. "Though I admit curiosity about why this conversation requires your office rather than the penthouse. Because what I want to ask deserves the same setting where you first trusted me with your future," he said, standing with fluid grace and moving around the desk to face her directly. From the same drawer where he had once produced contract documents, he withdrew a small velvet box that immediately clarified the purpose of this meeting. He opened it to reveal an engagement ring that was both elegant and substantial, diamonds arranged in a setting that suggested generations of careful craftsmanship. "Zara Williams," he said, his voice carrying emotion that made his usual control seem fragile. "Will you marry me? Will you become my wife legally as well as emotionally? Will you help me build a family that honors the memory of what we have lost and celebrates the future we have found together?" She looked from the ring to his face, seeing vulnerability mixed with hope, understanding that this proposal represented far more than romantic gesture. He was offering permanent partnership, legal protection for both her and Hope, transformation of their arrangement into something that could withstand any external challenge. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Yes to all of it. Yes to marriage and family, and whatever comes next." He placed the ring on her finger with reverence that spoke of promises being made and accepted, the weight of it both substantial and comfortable against her skin. The diamonds caught light from the windows, creating small rainbows that seemed to celebrate the moment with appropriate beauty. "I want to adopt Hope legally," he continued, his voice stronger now that her acceptance had been secured. "I want her to have my name and my protection and every advantage that family membership provides. I want her to grow up knowing she belongs completely and permanently." "She will be Hope Kong," Zara said, testing the sound of their daughter's new name and finding it perfect. "And I will be Zara Kong. We will be your family in every way that matters." "There is more," he said, returning to his desk to retrieve documents that had been prepared with the same thoroughness that characterized all his business dealings. "I want you to become my partner in the legitimate enterprises as well as my wife. Your legal training makes you invaluable for operations that require navigation of regulatory compliance." The papers outlined business structures that would give her actual authority rather than ceremonial titles, ownership stakes that ensured financial independence even within their marriage, professional responsibilities that utilized her education and abilities rather than merely her presence. "You are offering me everything," she said, reviewing terms that represented security beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. "Because you have given me everything," he replied, his honesty raw and complete. "You have given me peace when I expected only power. You have given me family when I thought I deserved only solitude. You have given me hope when I believed redemption was impossible." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the penthouse where they had built their life together, witnessed by Jiziak's closest associates and Zara's grandmother, who had traveled from her assisted living facility to see her granddaughter marry the man who had transformed both their circumstances. The ceremony was private but meaningful, vows exchanged with sincerity that left no doubt about the permanence of their commitment. Hope served as flower girl despite being too young to understand her role, carried down the aisle by Jiziak's head of security, who had somehow become devoted to the baby's welfare with the same intensity he brought to protecting her father. The sight of the dangerous man gently managing infant logistics while maintaining professional vigilance provided exactly the kind of surreal normalcy that defined their entire relationship. Their new home occupied the top 3 floors of a building that had been completely reconstructed to accommodate both family life and business requirements. The nursery was a masterpiece of safety and comfort, equipped with everything a growing child could need while maintaining security measures that ensured no threat could penetrate their domestic sanctuary. Zara's office was positioned adjacent to Jiziek's, their desks arranged to allow easy collaboration while maintaining independent workspaces. Law school acceptance letters were already arriving, her application successful beyond expectations, her future bright, with possibilities that extended far beyond mere survival. 6 months into their marriage, with Hope taking her first steps and Zara completing her first semester of law school with exceptional grades, they celebrated their anniversary by returning to the Grand Meridian Hotel where their story had begun. The VIP lounge where she had first served him cocktails had been reserved for their exclusive use, the same bar where he had tested her integrity, now serving champagne that commemorated how far they had traveled together. "You were exhausted and struggling and beautiful," he said, watching her prepare drinks with the same professional precision she had demonstrated that first night. "I knew immediately that you were different from everyone else. You were dangerous and powerful and lonely," she replied, adding garnish with flourishes that spoke of confidence rather than desperation. "I knew you could save me, but I did not know you would let me save you in return." Hope crawled between their chairs with determination that suggested she had inherited both her father's focus and her mother's resilience, babbling in sounds that might someday become words but currently served as commentary on the conversation she could not yet understand. "She will never know struggle the way we did," Jiziek observed, lifting their daughter with gentle reverence that still amazed Zara after months of witnessing his transformation from dangerous loner to devoted family man. "But she will know strength," Zara added, understanding that their child would inherit advantages they had been forced to build for themselves. "She will know that love requires courage and family is worth protecting, and some things cannot be negotiated or purchased." They looked out through floor-to-ceiling windows at the city spreading below them, lights beginning to twinkle as evening descended, millions of people pursuing their own dreams and struggles and hopes for better futures. Somewhere in those lights was a diner where Zara might still be working double shifts if circumstances had been different. Somewhere was a hotel bar where she might still be serving drinks to strangers rather than building a life with someone who valued her beyond any transaction. Instead, she was sitting in luxury she had earned through integrity, holding a child she loved more than her own life, married to a man who had proven that protection could become partnership and salvation could become home. The woman who had once counted tips to pay rent had become someone who commanded respect in both boardroom and courtroom, whose intelligence was valued equally with her presence, whose future was secured by love rather than merely money. Jiziek reached across the table to take her hand, his touch warm and familiar, his wedding ring catching light that matched the sparkle of her engagement diamonds. Hope settled contentedly in her mother's lap, surrounded by safety that had become so natural she would never remember a time when protection was uncertain or love was conditional. "This is what happiness looks like," Zara said, understanding that the journey from desperate bartender to protected wife and mother represented transformation that fairy tales could only approximate. "This is what home feels like," he agreed, his voice carrying satisfaction that extended far beyond material accomplishment to encompass peace that could not be purchased or negotiated, only earned through mutual devotion and sustained through daily choice. In the distance, the hotel where their story began continued serving guests who might be experiencing their own moments of recognition, their own chances for salvation, their own opportunities to discover that sometimes the most dangerous people are exactly the ones who can provide the safety that makes everything else possible. But Zara Williams Kong was no longer part of that world of uncertainty and struggle. She had found her place beside the man who had recognized her worth when she could barely see it herself, building a family that honored both their past losses and their shared future, creating something beautiful and permanent from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy them. Forever had never felt more certain or more deserved.